It's a very interesting context to speak about the role of cities and region in the future growth strategies of Europe. And I think it's also a moment for some careful reflections about that. Because, yes, culture and creativity, we know how important they are, but we also have to understand the specificities of this moment and of this context, and it's not really one size fits all, and especially it's not a password. It's not something that we can mechanically think can really translate into the future strategy and scenario of opportunity for Europe. So first of all, a very quick glance at the global scenario. Yes, Europe, especially in this programming period, there's been a big emphasis, we know, on culture and creative industries. But we have to understand a couple of things. First, we come late. The United States have been, colonizing this sector for decades, and of course they are recognized as the global key player. At the same time, we don't have the critical mass or the investment capacity of emerging countries, which are of course really taking up over this. So even in the best possible scenario, it will be very difficult for us to match this kind of big uprising that is coming from emerging countries. But there are a few aspects that we can really put in play, and it's very important, and then we have to go for this specificity. The first one is what we could call our embedded heritage. The role of heritage in the culture and creative production in the European context is quite unique. It's something that's very difficult in this moment to take up both, of course, for the United States, but also for the emerging countries, where of course heritage is in many cases remarkable, but its social and economic, let alone cultural role is still to be largely determined. And in many cases, a very culture of heritage is missing in some of the key countries. The second is civil society. I will not stress enough the role of civil society, of a mature civil society, of an active cultural citizenship in shaping the future global cultural scenario. And again, that's an aspect that Europe can really put in play. So if this is the case, how? What can we do? What's the real scenario of opportunity for our cities and regions? First of all, as I said, okay, creative industries are fine, we are in a delicate position, it's not necessarily that we will take the lead, but at the same time, it's not all that there is. Culture and creative industries, as we know them, are in a sense a transitional paradigm that is already being overcome more or less substantially by what we could synthetically call, what I have synthetically called Culture 3.0. A situation where, Culture 1.0, just to be reminding this, is patronage, basically, the economics of patronage that preceded the onset of culture and creative industry that historically only happened at the beginning of the 20th century. It's just one century, but it's already too major now. What's happening today is that the combination of the digital production of contents and second-generation social media connectivity is creating communities of practice where you can produce and distribute contents in ways that have nothing to do with the market, and nevertheless can have a tremendous social and economic impact. So the point is that, okay, culture and creative industries, but this is the new scenario. This is, by the way, a scenario where the big traditional culture and creative industry is taking a defensive attitude, a very myopic one. What's happening today, personally I think, what's happening today with the big culture and creative lobbies in the United States defending the copyright regime no matter what is an extremely myopic thing that is basically preventing them from really embracing the next wave of innovation. We have this strong contradiction that we are today crowdsourcing cultural production and at the same time having it marketed by traditional profit-making big multinationals, which is something that is not going to last long because, of course, there is a big cultural clash behind. And that's one point. So this means that in the new scenario, this specificity of Europe in terms of embedded heritage, in terms of civil society role, can really allow us to take again a new leadership if we understand how this Culture 3.0 paradigm is creating a new exciting synthesis between heritage, crowdsourcing of cultural production, and digital enabling technologies that really allow everybody to be at the same time a producer and a user of contents. And this has nothing to do with the traditional cultural in a creative industry paradigm. Second point, so if heritage is so important, how we can actually put it in place? So far in Europe, we have had a very traditional attitude. Is heritage really about cultural production? Not exactly. It's about cultural tourism. Of course, cultural tourism is perfectly legitimate. It's important. Nobody's denying the importance of this. But still, it's extremely important to understand that heritage is at the same time an archive. It's an incredible repository of ideas, of languages, of contents that can be put back in place in terms of culture and creative production. It's a narrative. It's something that really connects what's been or what will be. And in particular, the power of narrative and heritage has been so far really underplayed in Europe. Or better, it has been used in very myopic and some cases even counterproductive ways. The local identity thing that we know in some cases is very often the strategy or the occasion to create also xenophobic attitudes and so on. But heritage as a narrative can be much more and much different. And then a public space. Heritage is really a place where a community and the different communities can really open up a dialogue in totally different ways. And by the way, most of our European heritage has been generated this way. It's been generated by a dialogue of different cultures, ethnicities, and civilizations, and talking together. And finally, creativity. Well, I'm very uneasy with this term today, because creativity is a sort of, again, as a sort of passepartout. Mayor Rombautz, remember before, the creative class paradigm of Richard Florida. Well, I think that this is a thing of the past at the moment, because most of the creativity that is really interesting today is what we could technically call uncreativity. There is an incredible book that I would really like to suggest to everybody who is interested in this. Is a book that has been written by the current poet laureate of MoMA. Yes, because MoMA today has a poet laureate, Kenneth Goldsmith, which is at the same time also the organizer, the key figure of UbuWeb, which is a very interesting digital platform. And Kenneth wrote this book called Uncreative Writing, where he explains how you can really be extremely innovative in generating content, but not creating one single line of text. It's just using and remixing what's already existing and considering everything as text. This is particularly interesting. I was very, very much impressed by how he described his assignments for his writing class at the University of Pennsylvania. He encourages students to do exactly what is forbidden all other times. Copy and paste, use, imitate, import, whatever. And by really understanding what's the conceptual, strategy of putting text together, of putting meanings together, that is really the source of meaning today. So creativity is not about being fancy. Creativity is about really having a strategy to navigate the sea of contents. And again, can we really do this within a context which was previously dominated on attributing intellectual monopoly of certain types of contents? I really do not think so. And it's very important that Europe understands that if it really wants to leverage upon the real opportunities, this is a new paradigm and requires a completely different governance. And so very quickly into three possible principles that at the city and region level you can use to actually put in practice this kind of approach. The first of all, and I think is the basic condition without which nothing can really happen, is what I could call inclusive capability building. The real challenge is this. If we have a divide between a few people who are creative and skilled and a mass of people who are not, we have lost, simply and plainly. That's why a sort of class approach, a dual approach of creative, non-creative, simply doesn't make sense today in a developmental perspective. But this means that we really have to have a totally different investment strategy. It's about infrastructure, physical infrastructure is okay, but it's about intangible infrastructure of people. We have seen the Eurobarometer data of cultural active participation. They are frightening. There has been even, in some sense, we have not progressed, but in some sense we also worsened our position in many countries in terms of fostering cultural participation of people. So it's extremely important to have community-wide strategies for capability building, and we have to develop new models for doing this. We have to develop new approaches, new formats. And it's really about everybody. It's not just about the young, it's not just about the talented people, it's about everybody, because the communities of practice that we are building up require everybody to be part of it. The second aspect is what we could call the system-wide cultural orientation. Culture and creativity, culture and creative industries are not a sector. They are the connector of everything else. In a sense, what's really happening today with the onset of massive cultural participation is that we are discovering the links between culture and health, culture and innovation, culture and social cohesion, culture and entrepreneurship. So limiting culture to a sector and having a sectorial approach to culture and creative development, again, is very myopic. It's very much culture 2.0, so to speak. It's very much culture and creative industries as a sector of the economy. Whereas what we are really interested in is to create a new platform where culture really becomes the translation device between completely different worlds. And finally, local specificity and global relevance. It's extremely important that every city finds its way. What I really don't like in the traditional plug-and-play approach to creativity is that in the end, creative quarters of city all look the same, exactly like airports. They are creative airports, so to speak, but they really look the same. The cozy cafe, the art contemporary art museum, the fashion shop, and whatever. I'm really, well, let's be diplomatic. I don't like this at all. I think that it's very, 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 contrary to the spirit. But this really means that every city has to find its own way to it. And so let me conclude with just one example about doing it. Of course, in this context, I really don't want to overemphasize it, but previously, Mrs. Truppel cited that one of the big, challenges that we face as Europe in this moment is the culture capital competition. I am personally working as the director of the bid of Siena. I don't want, in this context, of course, to speak at length about this, but just want to make a tiny example of what does it mean in practice, local specificity and global relevance. So in Siena, we are really working about the relationship between heritage and social innovation. So what does it mean to be specific for us? An example is this. Siena, at this moment, is the city in Europe with the highest number of blood donors per capita per 1,000 inhabitants. So it's a city that, for whatever reason, has developed a culture of donation. So this is very locally specific. How can it be also very relevant at a European level, and how it can be related to a notion of heritage? Well, blood, violence, violence, heritage. Does Europe have an heritage of violence? Yes, of course. The whole history of Europe is also an heritage not only of buildings and good traditions, but of violence. So can we map the violence in Europe? Can we understand how this mapping of violence is determining today's xenophobic attitudes, today's local conflicts? Can we imagine a project in which we reunite Europe by involving local operators and players in rituals of reconciliation about past conflicts, even if these conflicts are 1,000 years old? Is this important for the future of Europe? Yes. So we are launching a project in Siena about the heritage of violence, and since we have this local specificity, we will ask all the local contexts that are involved to start any possible ritual of reconciliation by a mutual gift of blood donations. Because that's the most radical way to really reconcile the sorrow, to reconcile the pain. So it's very locally specific. It's something that happens in our city, but at the same time it's something that has to do with Europe, that can have a local relevance. This, I think, is a good example, but what I mean, culture as a translation device, connecting completely different things. Looking at things like the management of conflict in Europe, that is mildly linked to culture, but seems to be linked to some other things, but still using culture as the connector, as the translation device. I think that every city in Europe, if they want, have a plenty of possibilities to explore this kind of potential, and even more, if possible, to do it together. Thank you very much.